Every March, basketball and non-basketball fans alike come together for one of the biggest events in sports, March Madness. From filling out brackets to cheering on their favorite teams, millions across the U.S. double down on the tournament. But while the NCAA basketball tournament is a cultural phenomenon today, that wasn't always the case.
The NCAA tournament began in 1939, and it started in what I would call inauspicious conditions. So it was actually the third college basketball national tournament on the scene. So in 1937, the first tournament on the scene was what's now known as the NAIA College Basketball Tournament. It was a national event hosted in Kansas City. And then in 1938, that was the first year of the NIT, the National Invitation Tournament, that was hosted out of Madison Square Garden by a series of sports writers. And so when the NCAA tournament began in 1939, that was the third one and the least well-known out of those three.
That's Chad Carlson, a professor of kinesiology at Hope College in Michigan and author of Making March Madness. Carlson says that when the tournament began, it was actually taken less seriously than its competitors.
In fact, it had fewer teams than the NAIA tournament. They had 32. NCAA tournament only had 8 teams in its event, and it was much less prestigious than the NIT, which was able to offer more money to its participating teams and had more fans because Madison Square Garden was the largest basketball arena at the time, and it was easy to fill that in New York City. The NCAA tournament in 1939, that original event, actually lost money. They lost $2,500, and part of that was because they couldn't find appropriate venues where they could drive up ticket revenue.
The following year, the tournament was hosted in Kansas, and luck was on its side. With the University of Kansas making the final, ticket sales soared, giving the tournament some much-needed financial stability. By 1942, the tournament made its way to Madison Square Garden, boosting its recognition and profits even further. The momentum continued into the 60s as more games were broadcast nationwide on networks like NBC. But it wasn't until 1985, when the tournament expanded from 32 to 64 teams, that it became a widely anticipated annual event. The bigger pool encouraged more spectators to make brackets, an activity that's still wildly popular with fans today.
The bracket is a big part of why March Madness is so exciting and addicting, and participating in a bracket, if you're competitive, can be really exciting. It can connect you with other friends who are participating in brackets as well and being competitive with them. And then, of course, if you're using money or betting with your bracket, then there's the potential to win money.
That's Jamie Shapiro, professor and director of Masters in Sport and Performance Psychology program at the University of Denver in Colorado. She says that the ability to compete against family, friends, and coworkers can make March Madness more addicting to watch than other sporting events. It also has some unique features that make fans more invested in it than other tournaments.
Sports in general are addicting for us, right? So our consumption of sports, it seems like this unquenchable thirst, right? You put more sports on television, we're going to watch more sports, right? You stream more sporting events, we're going to watch more sporting events. So part of it has to do with just sport in general. But I think the other part that has to do with it is just the chaos. There is madness, all the upsets. We can watch NBA playoff basketball, and it's every level is a best of 5 or best of 7 series, right? And so generally the better team wins over the course of 5 or 7 games. Same thing would be the case for the baseball playoffs, right? 3, 5, 7 game series, the best team oftentimes comes out on top. But in a one-off game like this, I mean, it's just, there's something really special about that you really just have to be on for 40 minutes, or your opponents have to be off for 40 minutes, and really anything can happen. And part of the fun is, even if your bracket is terrible and you finish last in your pool, there might still be that one upset that you picked.
Without upsets, March Madness wouldn't be March Madness. Many fans can't help but root for the underdog. In fact, psychological research has found that people are more likely to root for lower-seeded or Cinderella teams to win.
There are a few reasons that people want to root for the underdog or see that Cinderella story. One is that they might identify with that underdog, saying, I'm an underdog in some ways, maybe at work or in other areas of their life. And so if they can see a team outperform somebody that they shouldn't have outperformed, that could give themselves hope that they might be able to overcome challenges in their own lives. I think there's also just more emotion when an underdog wins. So when a team wins that's supposed to win, then your emotions might be, okay, that was supposed to happen. But if there's an underdog team that beats a team that they weren't supposed to beat, there's emotional stimulation with that. So it could be good emotion, really being excited that somebody who wasn't supposed to win actually wins, or it could be anger or frustration if you were counting on that higher ranked team to win.
While a Cinderella team like last year's NC State typically makes a lot of noise, no one gets more attention during March Madness than a superstar. Unlike other team sports, basketball is unique in the fact that one player can change the trajectory of an entire team. And while this has been observed across various levels and leagues, this holds especially true for women's basketball right now. In fact, players like Iowa's Caitlin Clark and USC's Juju Watkins are credited with making last year's tournament the most watched women's March Madness in history.
The other thing that makes basketball special is the ability of one player to take over a game in ways that you just can't in other team sports that just rely so heavily on everybody on the team doing their job. If you have one player that's hot in college basketball, right, they can take their team to levels that were previously unforeseen. And so last year in the tournament, we saw a number of teams that had these, once in a generation type of stars that really drove interest, right? Everyone wanted to watch Caitlin Clark and wanted to watch Angel Reese and wanted to watch Cameron Brink. And, the list goes on. So that it was a really star-studded cast of players that have all now moved on to the WNBA. So I think that the water level goes up whenever we have that kind of player. I think what will hurt the tournament a little bit is Juju Watkins tearing her ACL, but you still have this really dominant star, and that's fun for people to watch. So I think we'll continue to see the popularity of women's college basketball grow as we have more and more stars that come into the game and can capitalize on their fame while they're in college.
Viewership has dipped for women's games this year due to the absence of star players like Clark, who have moved on to the WNBA. But even without them, ratings are still up 43% compared to 2 years ago. And this impact goes beyond basketball. The hype around women's March Madness has bled into other women's sports, like soccer and hockey, that are seeing increased attention and revenue. Clearly, both March Madness tournaments are trendsetters in the sports industry, so much so that other leagues and teams are trying to recreate the magic.
I noticed this year that college football tried to mimic the March Madness bracket style, and I think it is because they have seen the success of March Madness in getting both basketball fans and non-basketball fans to follow along when people participate in brackets, again, connecting with friends over who wins, who loses, who wins the bracket, that football has modeled after that.
Despite other sports' best efforts, nothing quite matches March Madness. The tournament unites fans in a way that few other sporting events can replicate. It also builds community within the sport, allowing teams that would never play each other otherwise to face off on a national stage. By doing so, the tournament is not only shaping the future of the sport, but is also creating some really great basketball.
A lot of times teams are seeing each other, firsthand for the first time. Of course, they watch video on each other. They've seen game film. But you don't get BYU and Alabama playing against each other very regularly. You see Houston and Purdue that don't play each other, very regularly. They're just in different leagues, and there's so many teams to play against in the regular season. So I think part of it is the novelty of playing against different teams. Part of it is the novelty of taking a team like Mount St. Mary's that has to go up against Duke, right? Duke's not scheduling them very regularly in the regular season, and so they get an opportunity to play against them. And there's something special about the intersection of two teams at totally different levels.
To find out more about Chad Carlson, Jamie Shapiro, and all our featured guests, visit viewpointsradio.org. You can find Carlson's book, Making March Madness, on Amazon.com or request copies to be stocked at your local bookstore. For more behind the scenes, check out Viewpoints Radio on X, Facebook, and Instagram. This segment was written and produced by our associate producer, Grace Galante. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Gary Price.